also looking at other innovative ideas that look into car sharing schemes as we consider this as one of the new ideas. We're also indeed to announce today or to share with you the Bloomberg New Energy Finance Climate Scope Report that will be published today, but we just wanted to give you a piece of it. You will get details later. But the news is so exciting that we can't hold it to the publishment later. This report shows developing countries that are leading in global clean power transition, and Rwanda ranks the 5th in the world for this promotion. Rwanda comes after Chile, India, Jordan, and Brazil. And I guess with the new efforts and with further encouragements, we tend to come to the first positions, definitely. This actually is not just a matter of the position on a global range, but it demonstrates the fact that anyone and any country can actually achieve this. And what we just need to do is to have the long-term vision, the clear targets, the plan in terms of attracting investments, and the right regulatory framework that needs to be put in place. At the same time, as we attract investments, we should also be conscious of the investments that are not threat to our people, to the health and the environment of our people. But in other words, this is the time for Africa to grow, to increase its green growth, to increase its circular economy investments, place the young people in the green jobs, and promote a continued and consistent improvement in the resources that we use, and also to be that is healthy, wealthy, and prioritizes green growth in all aspects of creating more jobs, in all aspects of improving and growing our economies for a better future. If we don't build it today, we don't have the future that we want to have. Thank you so much for your attendance, and I wish you fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Winnie. Thank you very much. I think she deserves a second round of applause, I think. Mashirika for the performance before we go to the next step. But before that, just simple communication, because for those who were here, we made it clear that this event aims to be paperless. So I don't see papers around, and we encourage people to come with their notebooks, and if they are green, it's better. No, I'm kidding. They can be, but because I'm green, so I always go around with the green. We also try to make sure that this is a plastic single-use free. You don't see bottles around. So this is something very good, and we encourage people to continue even at home. So try to bring some, bottles, and we have water dispensers around. So if you want some water, you can just go and take a glass and have water. And this glass will be used for a long time. And when they are broken or they are disposed, or they will be recycled. Very interesting. And in order to avoid papers again, we have Africa Green Growth Forum AGGF app. You can always download it from Google Play, the way you do with WhatsApp and others. Thank you very much. Mashirika.
Is that great? Go. I'm supposed to go around. I'm going around. Not yet. Somebody's around. Those people. Those people from there. 1, 2, 1, 2.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Africa, Africa shine, motherland.
Shine, Africa.
Africa shine, my motherland. Shine, Africa, Africa shine, my motherland. Shine, Africa, Africa shine, my motherland.
Shine, Africa.
Africa shine, my motherland. Shine, Africa, Africa shine, my motherland.
Shine,
Africa, Africa shine, my motherland.
Like a newborn at birth, attached to its mother by the umbilical cord. This womb earth reminds us of the power of nature. It is our shared vision for the health and continuity of humanity. Climate change encourages us to find this power in our unification as the people of Africa.
What has become of you, my children? I held you in my loving arms, that you turn your backs on me. You tear out all that I gave you. Wizeichi, look at what you have done to yourself. I fed you from my bosom, yet you take for granted my love. I have cried for you, my love. Why don't you see the errors of your ways? Change your ways before it is too late.
Why? Why, Africa? Why? Think about what's at stake. We suffer until we suffocate. So tell me, why, Africa? Why? Sometimes it's like I can't breathe. We're in our own homes, yet we can't leave. Like, is it worth it? But the noise everywhere. Now I can hear the solutions to fix the atmosphere. Smoke everywhere. Now I can see the person that I'm meant to be. But I also know that together we can find a common goal for the motherland.
Tell me, Africa.
Move it on. From up. Take it up, take it up.
About the possibilities. All the potential. On us. We can do it.
Oh, Mama Africa, Mama Africa. Oh, Mama Africa.
We come from a rich land, but we have distorted our rich land. Our rivers are drying, our forests are being cut down, our land is being scorched. This is not the Africa we want. We want an Africa with green vegetation, an Africa where the rivers are flowing, an Africa that we can be proud of, an Africa with green pastures, the one we once had. Give us that Africa.
Let us keep Africa green,
Green,
yielding abundant harvest,
abundant harvest,
healthy generation,
healthy generation,
with vast job opportunities.
vast job opportunities.
We have the technology, we have what it takes.
We have technology.
Now let's do it.
Let's do it.
Arise, Africa, Mama Africa.
Oh, 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 oh. Africa.
My home is my soul's resting place.
Resting
It is
place.
where I lie my sorrows when all goes wrong. My heart soars when I know I can breathe the fresh, clean air.
Breathe the fresh, clean air.
So distinct, that sweet smell of fresh grass and rainfall.
Amazing
So
Africa.
sweet.
So sweet.
As the clear waters pass through the valleys,
Clean
born a sense
waters.
of harmony, a happiness we can see in the smiles of our people, a future our children and their children's children can look forward to.
Yes.
Africa, a life trademark.
Yes.
The future we can look forward to. Opportunity.
Opportunities.
Technology. The land of the River Nile, the land of the Victoria Falls, and the land of Lake Tanganyika. Oh, Africa.
Jesus. Africa. Renewable energy. Recycling. We have the technology.
A green Africa.
A green Africa.
A technology-based Africa.
Technology-based Africa.
The land of potential and opportunity. opportunity.
Opportunity. Jesus. Uh-huh.
For a green and climate resilient Africa.
From
Amazing
Cape to
Africa.
Cairo. We can do it.
From Uganda to Kigali.
The Victoria Falls. Lake Kivu. The Nile. Yes. We can do it. Africa, our motherland. Yes, Africa. Together, we can do it. One Africa for a green and climate resilient Africa.
Thank you, Mashirika. Thank you very much. I think they deserve more. Don't mind the few plastics you saw here. They will be recycled this afternoon. You just wanted to remind us that we need to do that. So rivers are drying, lands are being degraded, and they say we have technology. I think they meant clean technologies. We have human resources, and then they feel to say, let us do it. In order to continue in the same thinking and see how we can do it, we need finance, we need green investment, and on this note, I would like to invite Frank Risberman from Global Green Growth Institute, his Director General. He flew all the way from South Korea, and he came here to tell us some good news about optimistic view about green investments.
Good morning, honorable ministers, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. After the inspiring words we already heard and after such a strong performance, I think we all can be inspired and indeed think about how we can make that reality happen. Indeed, yesterday we had a very good session about green growth strategies, and for those of you who were not there, we were warned that indeed green growth is absolutely necessary given the urgency of climate change, pollution, and other consequences of ignoring the green side of growth. So while we want growth, it needs to be green, but the good message is it is also affordable. So for many of you who are not yet convinced to, if you like, of the reality of those targets, we do need very ambitious targets. For Africa, there really is no other option than aiming for 100% renewable energy and access for all. It should be possible to have 100% electric vehicles for transportation. We should have all of our new buildings built green. We should have sustainable infrastructure. We should have hundreds of millions of hectares of land that are farmed in a climate resilient way and where we maintain our ecosystem services. And we need at least 100 million green jobs for young Africans in the next generation. So is that feasible? Maybe to stretch your hands. Who among you thinks that is feasible? That's good to see that show of hands. But maybe some of you will wonder who will pay for that. And we may have some surprising answers for you here today, because it's not the usual suspects. You know, if you see the analysis of how much money is needed, the World Bank a few years ago came out with an analysis of what it would cost to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. $4.5 trillion every year. Those are numbers to mind around. So where is that money going to come from? Well, in fora, in conferences such as these, we tend to focus on development assistance, we tend to focus on climate finance and so on. But unfortunately, even in optimistic analysis, at a global scale, ODA, green and climate finance from the assistance side is not more than 6-7% of the total. 6-7%. And while for Africa that might for the moment be a bit higher, the point is that's not going to do it. Governments are playing a larger role and will play a larger role. That means ordinary citizens through their taxes in the end. But the largest role will have to come from the private sector. The largest role in financing all this will have to come from the private sector. Is it possible? Well, things would have to change really rapidly. We can't sort of look at what we have been used to in the last 5 to 10 years and extrapolate. We can't base what is necessary for the coming years on what we have seen in the past. We need disruption. We need completely different business models and different thinking. Is that feasible? I suspect many of you would say not. But I still remember on a day in 2007 when my boss, I worked at Google at the time, showed me the first iPhone. 2007, it's only a good 10 years ago. At that time, I was working with Google on development of new projects, IT projects for Africa. I had a BlackBerry in my pocket. We were working on text applications. My boss said, forget it, we'll work on smartphones. Most people at the time said, people in Africa, they're not going to have smartphones. Now, I don't know how, I don't have to ask how many of you have a smartphone in your pocket. I think all of you do. It's that kind of speed of change that we'll need. And it wasn't funded through development either. It was funded because people want to buy phones, because business sees an opportunity. And yes, because then there were probably some smart things, you know, the M-Pesa started with a small grant from DFID to test out such a model. And then it took off through private sector financing. I think there we have to take our inspiration. Of course, we already are seeing a disruption in renewable energy. The largest investments in energy in the last few years are in renewable energy. So indeed, we'll have to find ways to come up with finance to roll out renewable energy, and not just for the 20% who are connected now, but for the other 80%. We'll have to find ways to have e-mobility. I had a little ride on an electric motorbike this morning from Ampersand. Now it's still just a prototype, but you'll have to imagine that just like in China, in just a few years, all the motorbikes in Kigali and other African cities will have to be electric. That is the challenge, that is the mindset I think that we need to have. And yes, I think it is possible. Now, does that mean climate finance is not important? Of course it is. You know, as GDGI, we support developing countries having more access to climate finance. The barriers need to come down. As GDGI, we helped develop 5 full proposals that have been submitted to the Green Climate Funds Board. 2 of them have been approved. Very happy to say those were for Ethiopia and Rwanda, but those were grants. In a way, grants are too easy. The next 3 we helped develop were funds, financial mechanisms, for Mongolia, for India, for Senegal. And those use the Green Climate Fund money smartly, either for a loan where the Green Climate Fund interest rate is lower, combined with the government's loan so that together it becomes attractive for the private sector, or by having the Green Climate Fund take a first loss, or by having the Green Climate Fund fund some technical assistance for private banks so they can get in the business. So yes, in Mongolia, it wasn't the government. The government was involved, but we worked with the Mongolian Bankers Association, and in the end the proposal was submitted by a private bank. In India, the proposal comes from NABARD, a government or state-owned bank, but it combines about small and medium enterprise debt finance in the off-grid energy sector. It's those solutions that I believe will make the aid money stretch much farther. I would say 10x. Every dollar in aid should at least attract $10 from the private sector. Those are the kind of solutions that we need to make, and they need to be door openers. So yes, it would be great if some donors could demonstrate that mini-grids in Rwanda are indeed feasible, are practicable, and then help the price down. And then the next couple thousand mini-grids will have to be financed by the private sector. The prices will have to come down. You know, we hear from too many people, oh, in Africa everything is more expensive. Well, mobile phones are not more expensive. We'll have to find a way, for instance, through auctions, to drive the price down. In Asia, those really low prices in India were through reverse auctions, by getting a good power purchase agreement ready. The power purchase agreement is what makes the project bankable. Yes, the government will have to get in there. They'll have to promise to buy energy for 20 years. They'll have to agree a decent kilowatt hour price, and there will have to be a credit-worthy off-taker. Recently, we were in a conference called PNG, the Partnership for Green Growth and the Goals, in Denmark, and the Bangladesh government was pitching to investors, you know, a couple hundred megawatts of renewable energy projects, and they were offering bankable power purchase agreements. That's the role of government. Then the private sector will come in, because the largest amount of money sitting on the sidelines are institutional investors. Really, the only pockets that are deep enough to meet that financing gap are the regular banks, the pension funds, the institutional investors. They have the assets, they have the hundreds of trillions of dollars that can flow into this sector. Why are they sitting on the sidelines? Well, they're not sitting on the sidelines everywhere. Rapid transition in renewable energy in the UK came from wind energy. Yes, when some 10 years ago the government decided to move away from coal, they were just as anxious as in many other places. They were worried that there would not be energy security, or that the jobs in coal would disappear. But now they're pretty proud of their industry that builds these offshore wind turbines, and they've created lots of green jobs, and the price of that energy is lower than coal. So green growth is not only necessary, it is absolutely affordable. We'll have to find ways for Africa to join that revolution and to leapfrog. When we discuss the same kind of solutions in Asia, their disadvantage is that they already have the coal-fired power plants, they have the nuclear power plants, so they have a lot of stranded assets. That's the biggest obstacle in Asia to move into renewable energy. So here, just like for phones, there ought to be an opportunity for Africa to leapfrog, move straight into the green growth world. Does there not need to be a contribution from others that have been sending those emissions into the air? I mean, Africa didn't cause climate change, right? We all agree on that. Africa needs to focus on adaptation. Africa needs to focus on sustainable landscapes as well. I think a key part for those transfers, even potentially larger than development aid, are going to be carbon markets. I know that carbon markets have imploded in a way, so the prices went way down. People have become discouraged. But there are surprisingly more active carbon markets in the world. There are surprisingly more citizens that are paying for carbon through carbon markets. And if we are getting the rule book, the Paris rule book, right in Katowice, then that will become much more widespread. Currently, we have a carbon market in Korea. Price is not very high, 20 tons, but that is high enough that companies in Korea are looking for opportunities for cheaper carbon credits elsewhere. And the government has allowed those Korean companies to make investments. So we're having a project in Laos for Korean companies to fund the e-tricycles in Vientiane and count the carbon credits back on the Korean carbon market. Those are the kind of transfers that would scale. Private sector investments that can cash in on those carbon credits. The Asian Development Bank already uses $26 per ton in their analysis. And Norway has government has set a carbon price of $60 per ton. So countries like Rwanda, you may not need to reduce your emissions out of guilt, if you like, but it could do it as a market opportunity. I think there's a lot of good news there and a lot of opportunities to draw in the private sector. In fact, I sat not long ago at a World Bank IMF meeting in a panel with the private sector, and the private sector companies asked, what is our opportunity to cash in on that GCF money? How do we tap into that aid? They should invest in green growth, and they are. There is a large 100% renewable energy movement, not just of countries. Some 30 countries have committed to 100% renewable energy targets, but many companies have too, and they're driving investment. Companies have joined the 100% electric vehicle movement as well. So I think seeking those partners and building zero emission industrial zones, having zero waste areas where the green jobs are created, those are the kind of opportunities that I think we should discuss here together today and make a reality. I think you'll find that governments have an important role to play. Development assistance can be a key, drop of oil to grind to help sort of make the wheels go, but the real power will have to come from enticing the private sector and the institutional investors to join us in powering the green growth revolution in Africa. I look forward to those discussions. Thank you very much.
Frank says green growth is necessary, but also is affordable, so it can compete with other types of investment. And if you add the positive externalities and the avoided social costs and environmental costs, then you can think how this would be the best world if everybody was focusing on green growth, green investment. I want to, before I invite the guest of honor, I just wanted to inform you that the machines that we are using here, the computers that we are using for projection and taking notes, they were made from waste. The computers that you are supposed to throw out, there is a company here in Rwanda called EnviroServe. They collect all those computers, they refurbish them, and we reuse them. If you have your computer that is old and you flew from, not South Korea, or you flew from somewhere else and then you want to to leave it here, because I know Frank has a new computer, so it's not. So anybody who brought an old computer, instead of you can leave it here, and then EnviroServe will make sure that it's recycled. So without taking too much time, I would like to ask you to help me to invite the guest of honor, Honorable Minister of Environment of Rwanda, Dr. Vincent Biruta, for remarks as a guest of honor.
Honorable ministers, government representatives from nations across Africa, cabinet members, the governor of the central bank, the mayor of the city of Kigali, governors of provinces here present, excellencies, ambassadors, government partners, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Mwaramutse, good morning. It's a pleasure to welcome you to the official opening of the Africa Green Growth Forum, and I'm pleased to see many people come together from across the continent and around the world to join a dialogue on how we can advance Africa's green growth. Africa is developing quickly, and we need to ensure this growth can be sustained for generations to come. That can only be achieved if it is green, clean, and climate resilient. That is why the government of Rwanda has organized this forum to bring the private sector together with policymakers and investors to advance green growth and raise awareness about the potential of a new model of economic development. It's our hope that over the next few days you will share best practices so that together we can foster investment and innovation in green growth. The Africa Green Growth Forum also aims to encourage private sector investment in green growth, improve the understanding and use of finance as a tool for climate resilience, and provide a platform for partners to engage and build relationships that can accelerate the green growth agenda. Some of the highlights of the week include today's investment forum and events on electric mobility, the circular economy, and innovative finance for green growth. We are also hosting 20 companies from across the continent for an exhibition on green technologies, and I hope you will take time to visit their stands. As part of the forum, we will host a concert on Friday evening to award champions of green growth in the fields of industry, local government, media, and youth to showcase some of Rwanda's leading green initiatives. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, if you are in business today, you need to be thinking about green growth. By incorporating green growth into your business model, you can be more efficient in your operations, increase productivity, and have a positive impact on the environment. Put simply, green growth is good for business. It drives up profits that can be sustained for the long term. This is important for both investors and employees. We must remember that green growth doesn't mean limited growth, but rather smart growth. By taking advantage of new business models that use resources to their full potential, eliminate waste and pollution, and support nature to regenerate, we can create new and higher paying jobs. This kind of smart and high quality growth takes an intergenerational view of prosperity. We need to be thinking about profit in the next 5 years, as well as what's good for Africa over the next 500 years. And the process we are making is positive. Across the continent, government and business are working to integrate the principles of green growth into their economic growth policies and their daily operations. The private sector is investing in new technologies to drive clean energy development, exploring the circular economy, and investing in rehabilitating our ecosystems. Still today, a major challenge we face in achieving green growth is simple awareness. That's why the forum is such an important event. Once leaders from all sectors of society understand the benefits of green growth, they are quick to adopt it. We need to keep raising awareness and explaining why green growth is an investment worth making. We also need to break the myth that green growth is more expensive than traditional development. Sometimes the upfront investment may be higher, but in the long run, green growth is a cost saver. In Rwanda, we are investing in green growth in a number of ways, with a focus on clean energy, waste management, and green urbanization. Currently, renewable energy accounts for approximately 70% of Rwanda's energy mix. And Rwanda recently established a state-of-the-art e-waste recycling facility. We are also working with partners to build a green city pilot in Kigali and to green the country's 6 secondary cities. Indeed, the designs for Rwanda's single largest infrastructure investment, the Bugesera International Airport, were recently updated to improve its green credentials, and we are confident it will be one of the greenest airports on the continent. These are just some of the tangible activities taking place in Rwanda, and there are many more examples across the continent that we can be proud of. I challenge everyone in this room to keep up the momentum as we strive to build a green Africa. To conclude, I would like to recognize our partners who have played such an important role to make the forum possible, including the Global Green Growth Institute, One UN Rwanda and the United Nations Development Program, the World Bank and the Climate Investment Funds, the Embassy of the Kingdom of the Netherlands through Water for Growth Rwanda, the German Development Corporation through KfW, the NDC Partnership Secretariat, the Global Innovation Lab for Climate Finance, the Global Environment Facility, the African Development Bank, the African Center for Climate and Sustainable Development, and Afro Champions. Thank you very much indeed. I wish also to thank those who are contributing to the conversations we will have this week, and we hope that the ideas and innovations being discussed will lead to tangible and concrete steps to promote green growth, transition to low carbon energy systems, and build prosperity for Africa. Once again, thank you for joining us here in Kigali, and I wish you a pleasant stay in Rwanda, and hope that you find time to visit some of the many green growth initiatives we are undertaking, and we look forward to learning from you about your own green growth experience. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. The Minister says green growth is good for business, and then it leads to smart growth. And I think this is a good message. I saw that everybody was listening, and I'm sure everybody will take this message home. I have the last remarks in the form of presentation. I think everybody would like to know what is the state of green investment in Africa. I had that question before, and when I looked at the program, I realized that there's someone from Africa Development Bank called Mr. Anthony Nyong, who is the Director for Climate Change and Green Growth at the bank, and he's going to make a short presentation on this state of green growth in Africa. Welcome, Anthony.
Hi, good morning, distinguished ministers, guest of honor, the Honorable Minister of Environment, colleagues, you're welcome. I'm still waiting for the pointer. I requested for it yesterday. There's none. So who controls the presentation? Okay. Thank you very much for the invitation to present at this event today. It's important to us at the African Development Bank that we share our experience with what we've done over the past 10 years. I'm not going to talk about the state of play, but I'm going to talk about what have we learned over the past 10 years in addressing or in investing in green growth on the African continent, bearing in mind that we are Africa's largest development finance institution. So what we see has been why have we taken this route? Why have we chosen to invest in green growth? Several years ago, if you looked at most magazines, most journals, you saw Africa rising among the fastest growing countries in the world. But then we also saw that that rising, that growth in GDP was not inclusive, was not sustainable. It was basically cut natural resources, sell, discover more oil, dig it, sell. The GDP grew, but the countries were really not growing. And so there was a need for us to think of something else, even when it wasn't very popular at that time. Then we also looked at the issues of the paradox of our development. Yesterday we were reminded by Sir Dave that our economy takes up 26% of our natural resources. OECD 2%. But the other side of this story is that most of these natural resources we're depleting drive development in other parts of the world except within the African continent. So there was a need for us to think differently on that. Then we had the global agenda, Rio +20, the future we want. And I don't know how many of you here know that we had a compendium to Rio +20 called the Africa We Want, which transformed to the Agenda 2063. Then we've had the SDGs, the Paris Agreement, meaning that we needed to do things differently. Then we have the bank's 10-year strategy. It didn't just come out of the blues. At that point, 10 years ago, green growth was very unpopular, but we told ourselves, whatever comes on, Africa's agenda has always been defined externally. We need to sit together and define Africa's growth path. And we knew that whatever came out after the MDGs was going to have some element of green in it. We needed to define what was important to us. Then we have this very wrong notion. Amongst African countries, we still believed green growth, climate change was caused by the West. Let them fix it. It has to be money from the West coming in to do this. So it became a donor-driven agenda, which we didn't think was correct. So we put all this together and we asked ourselves one question. What is green growth for Africa? What shade of green? I've put this spectrum out there, and I took that from the logo of the Africa Green Growth Forum. It has different shades of green. Which green is green for any African country? I think we need to define this internally. We need to look at our specificities for each country. We need to look at our resource potentials. We need to look at development goals. We need to look at so many things coming into it. That's why I've left that there isn't a one-size-fits-all green growth. It depends on several circumstances. Can I have the next presentation? So for us at the African Development Bank, having seen all this, we set out to have a new strategy. We did extensive consultations around these strategies. As the Honorable Minister has said, awareness is important. We knew we needed to carry everybody along. We created awareness, we discussed, we brainstormed. At that time, it was unpopular. I remember a minister telling me, look, Anthony, my country needs growth. I mentioned this the other day. Growth by whatever color. Be it red, be it blue, I don't care. We just need growth. So don't limit us to green growth. Give us growth and we'll join you. So that was the consultations we went around. We reviewed national development plans and strategies, the bank's own plans and strategies, and then we also defined the elements of the bank's green growth framework. What is it that we'll be doing that will carry everybody along and be beneficial to others? So that's how we came up with the bank's 10-year strategy with two objectives that we rolled into one. How do we transition Africa to an inclusive green growth economy? It needed to be inclusive, and that's where we are. Please back to the, hold on, thanks. So we chose 3 pillars, and these pillars are very important because one is building resilience. Africa, we all know, is a low emitter, but we need to build that resilience to shocks, to climate change, to all the things, externalities. Then we needed to promote sustainable infrastructure. Most of Africa's infrastructure is yet to be built, and we think this is a good opportunity for us to do it right. It's cheaper to do it right the first time than to try to retrofit. So we saw our underdevelopment as a blessing in disguise, that it gives us the opportunity to do it right the first time. And then thirdly is on managing our natural assets, not just the physical capital, even the human beings. That's one of our greatest strengths. So we thought we needed to do that. So that formed the pillars of our green growth strategy, and you can see that is leading us to being able to put block upon block to see how we transform the African continent. Next, please. Having done that, the next question we ask ourselves was, what tools do we have? Yesterday, the colleague from UNDP said, you cannot adjust to what you can't measure. So we needed tools to drive this agenda. Some of these tools were developed purposely for this. Some grew organically to enable us to be able to implement our investments, learn from lessons over the years, and then improve upon it. We have the Climate Change Action Plan that we done, the Climate Safeguard System that allows us to screen every of our investments for climate risk and build resilience into them. We have our greenhouse gas accounting tool. We pride ourselves in saying we are a low-emitting continent. Yes, we are. But I think we should just remain a low-emitting continent in a way that does not really stop or put a brake on our development. If we let things go the way they are going, in a couple of decades, Africa will be the highest emitter if we do not check, if we allow the pace of growth to just drive what we're doing. So we account for the greenhouse gas emissions, lifetime emissions, in our investments. We invested in a green growth M&A framework, a green bonds framework, which is very important as a financing tool, and so on. So we have all these tools that we have developed over time. Having had the tools, next, we also realized we needed information. Data. Data is missing on the continent. Climate data, climate models. And we embarked on making sure that we strengthen that aspect of the puzzle. We invested between $55 and $58 million in strengthening our regional climate centers. We have 4 of them. We've just provided resources to create a regional center in Cameroon for ECAS, for the Central Africa region. So we thought if we could strengthen these centers, they would in turn be able to go down and strengthen national climate centers. It was important. When you look at some of our war-torn countries, where all their climate data were on sheets of paper that were destroyed and burnt all through the war period, you realize we were in some serious trouble if we were going to address these issues. So we've put in money to address the regional centers and some national centers, and also build early warning systems to build resilience into our communities. Next, please. Here, recall I said our investment needed to be inclusive. Our green growth needed to be inclusive. Women, gender became very important. I'll give you an instance. 66% on average or so of our labor force in agriculture are women, but they don't have access to credit. They don't have access to the other productive means of production. And we realized that was not going to work. If we were going to have sustainable agriculture, the people who do it, the experts, the women, needed to be brought on board. So we created what we call the AFAWA, the Africa Financial Alliance for Women in Agriculture. It's a 300 million facility that allows women-owned agribusinesses to access that money. The other thing we looked at and noticed was you cannot be talking about green growth in a conflict state. Nobody talks about green growth in Libya. Nobody talks about green growth in Somalia. And until recently in Sierra Leone or Liberia. And we've realized that women are very good managers of that peace process. They have what it takes to bring people together to talk. So we created a program that we called the Enhanced Gender Participation in Peace and Economic Activities to further bring women into this space. And finally, we have a gender tracker that reviews all our projects from conception to completion to ensure that gender issues are adequately mainstreamed into this. It's not something you throw in and say 50% of our beneficiaries are women. We need to track it. And that's very important. Next, the other group that we thought were very important are the youths. A colleague mentioned youths yesterday. Africa's bulging youth population is not a curse. It's a blessing, if properly harnessed. And so what we have done has been to create enabling environments for our youths. We have established regional centers of excellence to provide them the skills they need. Here in Rwanda, we've supported the Skills, Employability, and Entrepreneurs program. We have also supported the Rwanda Innovation Fund. These are things, innovations, initiatives that are driving the skills that we need to power Africa in the next century. We have a very good fashionomics program. The fashion industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Let's not make it look as if it's something you do by the side. So we really have strengthened it and brought in a lot of our youths into that space to tap into that. How do we get youths into agriculture? They don't want to be farmers. Farmers is for their grandfathers. They're agri-businessmen. So we've created the Enable Youth Program that is creating agri-businessmen and women into that space. And importantly, we have insisted that every of our investments must demonstrate the number of green jobs that it is creating. That's very important. Next, please. Also on inclusion. You see, it's very easy to talk about green growth to Morocco, to Tunisia, to South Africa, maybe to Rwanda, to Ethiopia. But when you now talk green growth to the very poor countries, the least developed countries, it becomes a difficult conversation. But how do you have inclusivity if you do not bring everybody on board? So what we have done has been to purposely focus some of our resources in those low-income, least developed countries. And we've made progress. It's taken a while, but we've made progress because we have been able to demonstrate that green growth is not either or. It is the way to go. And you'll be amazed at the number of developing low-income or least developed countries that have bought into this. I'll give you some basic statistics. That 34% of the resources that we put in low-income, least developed countries in Africa directly address issues of climate change and green growth. And that 80% of the operations in those countries are based on climate-informed designs. They love it, they're working on it, they're not complaining, and we help source the money for it. Next. So having looked at that inclusivity, we now explored what are the opportunities. Opportunities abound everywhere. Frank has just talked about telecommunications, water resources. I'm just going to concentrate on two, agriculture and energy. The reason being that, as the president of the African Development Bank keeps saying, there's hardly any part of Africa that you throw a seed in the air, it lands on the ground and it doesn't start germinating. So why do we spend $35 billion every year importing food? Because we have let our agriculture to be weather driven. When there's rain, when there's no rain, And we can't keep going that way. Climate smart agriculture will enable us to take advantage of this market, create agricultural products and produces and practices that do not contribute so much to greenhouse gas emissions, while also building resilience into this agricultural space. We have computed that through climate smart agriculture, we are creating about between $110 and $125 billion market every year. And we will continue to eat. It's either we as Africans rise up to this market, or those who are supplying will be praying that it should move from 35 billion to 40 billion. Who knows, maybe 60 billion, because it's a market for them. There are opportunities for us. Next. The other opportunity I want to talk about is what have we done in the energy space? When you look at this map of energy, you begin to wonder what special pact does God have with Africa? Because you look at the map everywhere, you can find there is some potential for some energy resources. But this is also the continent where over 600 million people do not have access to electricity. This is also a continent where over 600,000 women and girls die every year from indoor air pollution. What's their crime? Trying to provide food for the family with all these abundant resources. But we see it as a market that by 2030, we're looking at a 32 billion market opportunities just in a couple of years. We're seeing the mass drive in renewable energy. We're seeing the fast declining cost of technologies. Africa is a place everybody's coming to. We need to take advantage of that. Gone were the days when we thought it was impossible, it was too costly. We are seeing it is very cost effective, and the cost right now actually compares very favorably with those other polluting technologies. Next. All this costs money. Everybody says yes. So where would the money come from? We've already been told. I'm going to repeat it. But for us at the African Development Bank, we basically have three sources where these resources would come from. From our statutory resources, where we spend about $6 billion every year to drive transition, Africa's transition to green growth. Then we also have other funds for which we are either an accredited entity, like the Green Climate Fund. I'm happy that the director of the private sector facility of the Green Climate Fund is here. Very good ally. And then we also have our own funds that we've created separately from the statutory funds. But these are small. 6 billion a year does not compare to the needs that we have. The needs we have are in trillions. When you look at the Africa NDCs, collectively, it's about $4 trillion that will be needed. We need to move the needle significantly. Next. And how can we move that? There's money in this world. There's money on this continent. It is a matter of how do we position ourselves to tap into that money. Total assets under management in 2014 was about $75 trillion. When you look at other sources of money, like the real estate, you look at the economic losses from natural disasters. These are resources that we could take rather than seeing it as a loss. If we did things better to build resilience, we wouldn't be experiencing those losses. The Africa indices create a market of about 3 billion. We need to tap into that money. Let's not see it as an expenditure. Let's see it as a market opportunity for us to tap into. Next. And so I like this graph. This graph tells a very important story. When you look at global climate finance, it's divided into two. That which is driven by the private sector in red, different shades of red, and that which is driven by the public sector. when we look at that of the public sector, Africa benefits about 20 to 23%. But when we look at the private sector, we have less than 5%. And we've been reminded over and over that the resources we need for climate change would be driven by the private sector. 75%, if I must put a number, would come from the private sector. And if we are tapping less than 5% of this private sector capital into the continent, then there is a problem. We need to see how we can strengthen this so that we can have more private investment into the country. That's why the bank has established what we call the Africa Financial Alliance on Climate Change. The money is in the hands of institutional investors. We've brought all Africa's institutional investors together. Pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, insurance companies, stock exchange, central banks come together to create this alliance. How do we move Africa's investments from billions to trillions? How do we direct our investments to ensure that they align with the Paris Agreement and drive low carbon and climate resilient development? Like I mentioned the other day, it's a powerful initiative. We need to take what resources we have on the continent to drive our growth that we can define as this is Africa's growth, led by Africa, developed by Africa. And so that's what that financial alliance does. Next, please. Yeah, I'm rounding up. What have we learned? Why is the private sector not there? Very basic reasons. One is that the government has a role to play. As the government of Rwanda is improving its standing in terms of the ease of doing business, it's attracting resources. The private sector is there, waiting for where there is return. Private capital is very timid. It just doesn't come out every time. It requires certain stability to allow the private sector to come in. So I'm not going to go into all that. These are things that we've largely seen. And we have been trying to address this in our countries, in the bank, to ensure that we have more private investors coming next. This morning, if you watched CNN, you will see the riot in France on the increase in cost in diesel fuel. When I saw it, I thought to myself, should I pull out this slide? I thought, no. Why are we here? Domestic resource mobilization is very important for our green growth. And one of the ways we can mobilize resources domestically is through subsidy reforms. I just put that graph there. We spend 22 times on subsidy than we spend on energy. And that's not right. As a continent, we cannot grow an economy that way. We need $65 billion a year to give us universal access, but we spend $168 billion on energy access, on energy subsidies. How do we hope to do it? If we rechanneled, if we redirected, if we reformed part of this subsidy, we would have money to do what we need to do. Next, speed through this. And so, I've explained it further here, that African countries on average spend 0.3% of their GDP on energy. If development was important to us, we would tackle energy. And the lack of energy has put brakes physically on Africa's growth and Africa's development. 0.3% compared to 7% that we put for subsidies. We need to change that paradigm. Private sector, low. And we also need to do that. Next. Round up. So we've seen several barriers which have been listed. The minister talked about it, awareness. Frank also talked about it. And so I won't step into that. But these barriers need to be overcome. And I'm certain that Rwanda is also working towards overcoming these barriers. That's why it's moving up the energy profile and moving up in the ease of doing business. Next. We are working with the Global Green Growth Institute to create what we call the Africa Green Growth Index. It's going to be like the ease of doing business of the World Bank that will rank African countries in how they have created the enabling environment that will attract investments into green growth. And I want to see countries do what Rwanda has done, move from number 154 to number 12 to number 4. And by so doing, we will be attracting investors. Yes, next. So that's the Africa Green Growth Index. We've learned a lot of things in these 10 years. The first, like I've said, is not a one-size-fits-all. In doing this, you need to understand the specificities of the countries, your own country. You are not like country B. You have your own specificities, define your agenda. Next, please. We've also seen that when it comes to the means of implementation, like the finance, the capacity building, there are things that need to be done. Money alone will not solve the problem. We need the capacity. I've asked this over and over. Do we have the welders that will drive the sort of mini grids we are going to establish? We don't. Do we have the enough expertise for undersea cable laying that would drive Africa's growth? We don't. We need to create in these various capacities. Next. So in conclusion, green growth is not a one-size-fits-all thing, like we've discussed. We need to define what it means to us country by country. And then it encourages us to develop differently. We can't afford to have that paradigm that says, let's grow today, tomorrow we'll clean up. China has not been able to clean up and will not be able to clean up. I don't think African countries have those sort of resources that we want to invest wrongly today, have all the stranded assets, and then think we can clean up tomorrow. We need to encourage the implementation of Article 6 of the Paris Agreement that talks about market and non-market mechanisms. How do we value our natural resources if there's no market for it? I think it's important that we pay closer attention and continue to support the negotiations such that these mechanisms can be established to allow Africa to grow green. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anthony, for your very good presentation on how to transition Africa to green growth, opportunities, and where to get funds. So I think everybody has questions, but we are running out of time. So we will have time. We are still together. On est toujours ensemble. We will go to open the exhibition. But before that, as I said at the beginning, I will ask the first line to come here and line up here. And the second line will come on the stage and line up here. We'll have photo session. And after photo session, I think there are other sessions that will go on. But Honorable Minister and other people will go for the opening of the exhibition. Thank you very much, and murakoze. Hello, hello. Okay. Excuse me. There is coffee outside, so people can talk while having some coffee, and others will go for the opening of the exhibition. Because there is a session that is going to take place now in this room. So we'd like to ask people to go out for coffee and opening of exhibition and leave the room so that we can have the next session now. Thank you.